much for taking the time, and apologies, I've got you out of bed to do it, and hopefully we'll make it nice and easy for you. We'll start at the very beginning. I mean, Frank Zappa. I mean, the first time I saw you mention that your first record that you bought was Yogi Bear and Friends, I think it was, and then the second was was Frank Zappa. Now, Frank Zappa is obviously a little bit more complex than Yogi Bear, and maybe a little bit more eclectic as well. So, what was it that drew you into Frank Zappa at such a young age?
The album cover. I was very young. I was obviously going from Yogi Bear to Zappa. There was a department store up the street from my house, and I remember I had to be a certain age before my parents would let me cross the main street by myself.
Of course, yeah.
So the day that I was able to cross the main street, I went up and I loved music, obviously, and I saw the Zappa album cover for Freak Out, and I didn't really know Zappa, and I got the record and I listened to it, and I was stunned, and it was just so different. It was just like a wall of odd, beautiful sound. But I was very young, so I didn't really connect the artist, Frank Zappa, with the record. I didn't really. And it wasn't until some years later that my friend turned me on to a Zappa song that it was from Bongo Fury. No, it was, I think it was Uncle Meat, and the song was Electric Aunt Jemima.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that started my real love affair with Frank's music.
That's where the connection came from. Excellent.
Yeah.
And then in terms of Frank, I mean, you actually got hold of his actual home phone number as well, didn't you, when you were a teenager? And you phoned it up expecting to speak to Frank. And I think it was his wife that you spoke to originally, but you kept calling and calling and things like that. And you eventually got to speak with Frank himself. He'd come back off the road or whatever. I mean, what do you remember about that conversation?
He was in a very good mood. And I was 18. And I was going to school at Berkeley, and I didn't even have a phone. I was using my friend's phone, and he was very nice. Oddly enough, when I think of knowing Frank later, when I got to know him and work with him, I thought it was very odd that he took that phone call from me, because I was basically just like, I'm just a fan. But I knew that he was an Edgar Varese fan. Edgar Varese was a composer, and that he was looking for some scores. And it wasn't that easy to get scores back in those days, but the Boston Public Library had Edgar Varese scores. So I told him, hey, I've got some Edgar Varese scores I'd like to send to you, along with a transcription of some of your music, Frank's music, that I transcribed. And he gave me his home address.
Wow.
And I sent him that stuff. I did a transcription of the Black Page, and I sent him a tape of my band. I snuck that in there.
Of course.
And then I spoke to him again, and he was very, very positive about the tape and wanted to try me out for the band. But when I told him I was 18, he thought that was too young. But he was impressed enough with the transcription that I did that he hired me to be a transcriptionist. So I started to he started paying me, I think it was $5 a page, to listen to his music and write it down.
Phenomenal.
And he sent me, he sent me a big giant score called Moe and Herb's Vacation, and also the actual music for the Black Page, with a note that asked me to play it as fast as I can. So I made a tape of myself playing the Black Page, and I sent it to him. And the next thing I knew, the next time I had called him, I caught him in not such a good mood. And if Frank didn't want to talk, I mean, he was just like, there was just space, So, but then I saw this magazine interview he did in a San Francisco magazine, and he was talking about me and the tape that I had sent him of the Black Page, and I couldn't believe it. I'd never really even seen my name in print, you know. And there it was, Frank Zappa talking about me. It was really cool.
So how much later was you actually joining the band? When did he decide that you're actually old enough to come and do this with us now?
Well, he didn't. What happened was the day after, a couple of days after my 20th birthday, I moved to California, and I moved right down the street from him.
Not stalking him at all.
Yeah, and I just started going up to the house, and once you start going up to the studio, you know, Frank will just, if you have something to offer, he'll just suck you in, and you end up recording all this stuff, and that's what happened.
Incredible stuff. And that must have been kind of dream come true moment sort of thing for you, surely.
I was scared to death. I mean, I was very young, and it just seemed surreal.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, next thing I know, I'm in Frank's studio, and there's Vinnie Colaiuta and Terry Bozzio and Tommy Mars, and I'm like, wow. And he's giving me all this wild music to record, and then it was fun because they were fun guys to hang out with.
Yeah.
You know, Frank was just kind of amazing just to sit and talk with, because he would always, he was a great conversationalist. He always had an opinion about things, and he always, gave you his attention, and he listened when you spoke.
Okay.
You know, so and he was always interested and interesting.
Yeah. So obviously at this point you were a fantastic guitarist already. You had Frank spewing words of praise about you, so that was down. But what else did you learn from Frank? I mean, thinking of live shows, did you learn anything about stage presence when you were touring with Frank or anything like that?
Well, being a musician in Frank's band required certain tools, and there wasn't it wasn't the kind of band you get into to learn how to perform. Say you learn how to play high information music under pressure while laughing. And you had to keep your attention on Frank at all times. You know, I couldn't really play to the audience, you know, because Frank was conducting certain things. He, at any time during the entire show, he could give you a signal. He had various signals he would give you that would mean do this in a song. You know, if he went like this, that meant whatever you were playing, play it reggae. or he would go like this, which meant ska. Then he would go like this, that'd be the roster dreads.
Yeah.
So you play whatever you're playing, you turn it into reggae. Or he'd go like this, and whatever you're playing, you got to play it in 5/8. Or he had this one really great one where he'd walk around, he'd go like this, and that meant whatever you were doing, play it heavy metal. Big balls.
Yeah.
You know. So you really had to keep your eye on Frank, and we did probably 2 shows a night most of the time, with long sound checks where he would write and record. And then we had about 80 songs that you had to have memorized. And he would pick the set list. He would write the set list 5 minutes before the show. And it was different every single night. So it was a real challenge for someone like me, because I used to, for some reason, I had a fascination with playing the very complex lines on the guitar, you know?
Yeah.
So Frank finally had a guitar player that he could give all these very challenging, dense, melodic lines to. And they were all written. I mean, Sinister Footwear was like 20 pages of sheer terror, you know? So probably about 60, 70% of those 80 songs were sheer terror. And I had to practice them constantly because I don't know, you know, the guitar is just a hard instrument to play that stuff on. And the way my mind worked, I couldn't, you know, you can't just learn something like that and then leave it for 5 days and then go, oh, okay, yeah, he put Sinister Footwear on the set list. Let me play. You know, it didn't work that way. You had to play that shit all the time. So you wake up at 9 a.m. and you go to the airport and you fly to the gig, and then you get from the car and you go directly to the gig and you do a long sound check. And then you have 45 minutes before the first show. And then there's 45 minutes before the second show. And by the time you get, you know, we got back to the hotel, it was 2 o'clock, 1 or 2 a.m. And I had to practice because I don't know what songs he was going to call the next night.
Man.
So it, you know, I deteriorated pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine. That sounds incredibly intense, especially for someone so young and fairly new to the music business world as well. And it's not a kind of regular set. You're going to play the same 12 songs in a night and you know what the encore is going to be. And it just sounds so challenging. But at the same time, an incredible grounding for you, because nothing that kind of follows that could surely be anywhere near as difficult.
No, nothing. There was nothing. There's nothing. I don't know if there's anything in the business like that. Because Frank's music was so complex, but I loved it too because Frank's music, I just loved it. You know, some of it is so profoundly beautiful. I mean, take a song like Sofa or Redunzo. These are beautiful melodies to play. And I was young, so I had a lot of energy in a sense. You know, I wasn't afraid of anything. I may have been a little intimidated and nervous and naive around Frank because he was Frank Zappa. But when it came time to play in the music, I'm like, okay, shovel it on, brother, because I got this.
Fantastic.
I was really cocky and really confident, brutally confident.
Best way to be.
You have to have that. You have to have that with Frank. There's no messing around.
Yeah, absolutely. And after a couple of years with Frank and touring and living that kind of really intense lifestyle, you then went off and you built your own studio, didn't you, with your own bare hands, which is pretty incredible for your first solo record, Flexible. I mean, that's an incredible thing to do in terms of crafting your building as well.
Yeah, that was a dream come true. You know, the fascinations when sometimes you don't recognize these things till later in life. But the real fascination for me in my career, since you have a kind of some periods of time to look back at, I always lit up first and foremost with the idea of composing, writing music. I wanted to understand that language since I was 5 years old. You know, I wanted to own it, and I wanted to be able to wield it, and then. After that, oddly enough, it was recording because I understood it's 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. I understood the concept of recording, but there was something about the process that fascinated me in my mind. And of course, there was the fascination with the guitar, but I didn't consider playing the guitar because it seemed so out of my reach. It was such there was so much of a mystique to it. It stunned me every time I would look at a guitar. So it always seemed like, well, you're not good enough for that.
Wow.
But then when my sister came home with Led Zeppelin 2, And I heard that record, especially Heartbreaker. And when I was about 11 or 12, that was it. I had to play the guitar. And then, as fate would have it, my friend sold me a guitar he had for $5, and that kicked things off for me. But obviously, my perspective of recording was greatly enhanced once I started working with Frank, and I was in, I would watch him very carefully. He showed me how to edit tape. Once I learned how to edit tape, that was it. The first thing I bought when I had any money was a 4-track TIAC 4-track tape recorder, and I just recorded everything. And it was in a little apartment in Fairfax down in Hollywood. But then right after Frank, that's when I built Stucco Blue. And I had just saved enough to put a down payment on a house in Sylmar. And there was a tool shed out back. And I basically, built it out. And it took me 5 months, and it was great fun because I liked building too. Yeah. And then I started to record Flexible.
Incredible.
And then Passion and Warfare. Some of Passion and Warfare was recorded there, and some of Alcatraz, and some of Dave Roth.
Wow.
Skyscraper. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's incredible. In terms of Flexible, then, I mean, you released that on your own record label. You started your own record label instead of signing a crap deal with a standard company. I mean, that's a pretty bold move again for someone who's fairly young, who didn't have a big back catalogue behind them. How did you come to that decision? And did you ask friends in the business for advice and that kind of thing around that?
I had no real expectations, and the idea of recording a record, I knew I wanted to record. I was recording tons and tons of nonstop recording. But the idea of releasing it and trying to get a record deal and release it, I just didn't want to deal with it. I just didn't want to go out and, would you release my record? No, please. It's just, the music seemed too personal I didn't want to be subjected to anybody else's decision about anything. I just felt in a position of vulnerability if I had to depend on a record company, so, and I was so young and naive. I wasn't desperate at all. I had no desperation to be famous or successful. I just wanted to play the guitar and record these crazy melodies and songs. And the idea of like writing music, recording it, and listening to it, that was enough, but then I had all this material, and I had Flexible, and I thought, I wonder if I could, get this printed up so I could send it to some friends. And that's when the Evatone Flexi disc came into my life. And that's just like one of those little plastic, flimsy, bendy ones. And there was a company called Evatone, and they made them. And I thought, well, I know, I'll be the first one to release a record on an Evatone Flexi disc. And I started to look into it, and there was a lot of limitations to it. And then I thought, well, what the heck? Let me try to see if somebody will release this. And I started shopping it around. And there was one label, Enigma, and they were willing to release it. And the only reason they were willing to release it was because I was an ex-Zappa musician. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I ended up getting a deal from them. And when I read the deal, I was just stunned. It was like a $10,000 advance, and they would own the record, and they'd give me 25 cents a record. And I had to recoup the $10,000 advance from my 25 cents.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. They saw me coming, some stupid kid. And I took it to my attorney, and he said, no, Steve, this is a conventional record deal, and this is a good one. They're offering you an advance. Most people in your position, they wouldn't offer an advance. I said, yeah, but then they own my record. And he goes, yeah, that's what they do. This is, and it's 25 cents. He goes, yeah. And I said, fuck that. And I just said no. And because it didn't feel right to me, like I'm not gonna. Why should they get so much more? That's always been another kind of stumbling block in me, and it was always on an economic level. I could never understand why anybody would get paid more than me for my work, and they never have. Not in my career. I've always made sure that managers, agents, anybody, I get paid the most, the end. And if it doesn't work out that way, I just don't do it, because it's something, it makes sense. Now, of course, there may be situations where there's a lot of other people involved, and always my desire for that, for getting paid the most for my work, is that of fairness, because it's my work. And so many situations are different where, of course, you're splitting something and you're co-creating and things like that. But when it came time to record companies and things like that, I just thought, I just didn't want to be taken advantage of. So I did something kind of outrageous. I decided to start my own label. I was at 22 years old, because I just started to look behind the curtain, and I'm thinking, well, how do labels work? And the only thing we had to go by back then was like the yellow pages. There was no internet, there was no computers, nothing. But we figured it out. And I noticed that labels support, they have a great function. They pay for everything, and they give you the money to make the records, and then they take the record and it becomes part of their equity, because labels run great risks, and that's how they build their equity, by owning the masters. But I eventually and then what they do is they manufacture the records, and these were all vinyl back then, and some cassettes. They manufacture the records, and then they sell the records to a distributor, and the distributor puts it in the stores. The distributor goes around to all the stores and says, hey, you want to buy the... So that was something I learned, and I just thought, well, why don't I go to distributors instead of labels? And I did. And every distributor I called would say, no, we don't take product from artists. We take product from labels. So I started a little label. It cost me $12.50.
Oh, brilliant.
I just went downtown, filed the paper, and, had this little label. It was nothing, it was an envelope, but the envelope had flexible in it, and I found a distributor that was willing to release it, because he was a guitar head, Cliff Coltrane at Important Records. And he offered me $4.10 a record, and I retained the rights to the record. Nobody was taking it. And I said, well, yeah, and he took 1,000, and that was a lot of money to me, $4,000. And then he took another 1,000, and then another 1,000, and then another 1,000. Then the Attitude song got into Guitar Player magazine, and that was it. I mean, now he's taking 10,000, and then the record was distributed through their partner overseas. So, and then when CDs came out, I retained the same kind of distribution deal. So instead of getting on a good conventional deal, 50 cents a record, a CD from a label, I was getting $7.50.
Wow.
Yeah. And within a period of years, it sold like 400,000 copies.
Wow.
So that was crazy. It was just such a windfall. And I never really, I mean, I like money, but not, it never really, I was never one of these guys that went out and bought a lot of things except musical gear. The one thing I always kind of would spend on is a studio. I always had a studio, but, and I never really was into, well, I never did drugs or waste my money on cars. And if you like cars, that's great, but I didn't have any attraction. You know, I just wanted to play my guitar and record. And that's what I did.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Fascinating
I,
stories.
and listen, I want to just mention, I know it sounds like I'm bragging, but I'm the reason I'm telling this story the way it is that young musicians need to understand their independence, and they need to know that they are the boss of them. You know, and that you never need to allow anybody to take advantage of you. And your best weapon is information. Your best defense is to understand how things work. And it's not hard. It's really, it just takes a little bit of looking into, because artists have different kinds of brain muscles than business people. Artists are fascinated with notes, and business people are fascinated with dollars, you know, and that's fine. You need both. Or they're fascinated with numbers, you know, and it's good to have both. But all too many times I see the stories of people who got banged, artists that got banged through their career. And sometimes they believe they did, but they actually didn't, because they just didn't understand how some of the numbers work. So the reason I'm even telling this story, I made a lot of mistakes in the business. I made my share of mistakes for sure. And I learned from them. But it's important to just do a little homework to understand what is the equity of a musician. Mm-hmm. You know, like what, because you got to keep things balanced. It's nice. You could live very simply. I always just lived below my means a little bit. So if I was making, you know, $200 a week giving guitar lessons, I figured out how to live on $180 a week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I always thought that was important, and that's why I share the story.
Just moving on a little bit then, I spoke recently with Graham Bonnet, and he spoke very, very highly of you. He said you were amazing, and he remembers telling his parents that he's got a guitar player in who plays the guitar like it's a piano and all that sort of stuff. And what was your memories of your time with Graham and with Alcatrazz?
Well, it started out kind of where Frank had basically disbanded the band, got himself a synclavier, and started working on that. So I wanted to go out and start doing some things, because I couldn't understand in my head how I was going to put a solo band together and go out there. So I thought it would make more sense to join an established band. And when Yngwie Malmsteen hit the scene, he blew us all away. I mean, he floored us. And when he was leaving that band, I thought, well, you know, there's opportunity. And I auditioned for the band. I didn't think I was going to get the gig because I didn't sound anything like Yngwie. But I really liked the guys. You know, they were really good guys. And Graham was he had a great sense of humor, you know, and he was just very kind of it was my first opportunity to be in a band with somebody that was European.
Yeah. So
that was great. But when he would sing, I just couldn't believe it. The power that came out of his voice, out of his mouth, it was pretty stunning, you know, because I had, before that, I had never been involved with a singer like that.
Yeah.
So everything was kind of new. And it was really good for me because the guys trusted me, because I was very hands-on, and I could write. You know, I wrote the music, and I liked working with Graham. You know, I'd come up with the music, and he would put the melody in the lyrics. And like I say, he was a powerhouse singer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And really great sense of humor.
Fantastic stuff. And in terms of lead singers and legendary singers, another one came along not long after, Dave Lee Roth. I mean, he was leaving one of the world's biggest rock bands at the time, and he came back with a solo record and a solo band and that sort of thing. And you were part of that band behind him. Now, obviously, with your background with Zappa, and you've done a solo record, you then with Alcatraz. How did the recording and the writing process come for Eat 'Em and Smile? I mean, was it a collaborative thing? Did you get to put your ideas across as well?
Well, yeah, my ideas were being depended on because I was the guitar player, and Dave doesn't, he doesn't write guitar parts, So it was very cool because throughout my teenage years, I was a teenager in the 70s. And I was really into rock music, Led Zeppelin, Queen, Deep Purple, all that really good, and then progressive rock. So I had the rock and roll thing in my soul, so to speak. White boy from New York, Italian, rock and roll. You could call it metal, but it's a misnomer compared to what the word means today, But heavy metal, that's what we kind of alluded to it being. So it was always there in me. So when Dave Roth came along, it was an opportunity to kind of stretch that rock and roll muscle. And we kind of resonated well because he has an obsidian, he has kind of a bizarre sense of quirky humor. And so do I, We're both kind of kooky in a way. So it worked, like something like Yankee Rose with the talking guitar. I mean, sophisticated rock stars don't do stuff like that. I suppose, it's just too corny, but it was substantiated by some badassery, playing from the whole band, the energy that the band created. We felt indestructible. And Dave, obviously, he depended on his band to come to him with music that he can then approve or disprove. And then the stuff he liked, he'd write lyrics and melodies to, kind of like Graham. So yeah, that was fantastic because not only did I have the freedom to play anything I really wanted, I had to push myself to go beyond my, even beyond my own vision, so to speak. So I'll say the shadow of Edward hanging over me, I didn't feel pressure, because if I would have felt pressure, it would have meant I was competing with Edward. And you can't do that. That's foolish. You can't compete with Edward, So when I was making those records with Dave, I was very at ease, they were very enjoyable. I loved getting in the studio and knocking out those guitar parts. I didn't know what people were going to think. I can't control that. I just knew that I had an opportunity to push it, to push the bar. And I just did my best to do that, and I enjoyed it. We had a great time. Yeah. Touring with Dave Roth that was fantastic.
Obviously, you worked with Frank Zappa before that and Alcatraz and things like that. But in terms of Dave Lee Roth, I mean, his level of fame at that stage was absolutely massive, wasn't it? And the album you worked on, Eat 'Em and Smile, was a massive commercial hit. So how did that kind of resonate with you? Was that something that it sat nicely with you, the kind of big commercial success that came with all that?
Well, that kind of success affects people differently. Sometimes you don't even realize it's happening as you're going through it. At least that was the case for me. uh, with Frank Zappa, if you play with him and you leave his band, you got to go find a gig. It's not like you all of a suddenly become somebody that's sought after. You know, you put your time in, and it's a great gig. But joining somebody like Dave Roth's band, that's different. You're now a part of a group that is a personality that fits into a field where now you're known, you know, and especially if the voice behind David Lee Roth, I mean, the guitar behind the voice of Dave was Edward Van Halen. And all of a sudden, who's the guitar behind the voice now? We have to see how it sits with us because we're so used to Edward and Dave. So the recognition and the attention that was paid to me at that time that Eat 'Em and Smile came out was big. I think, you know, I say big, but it was in a small sliver of the music community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rock and roll, you know. And plus we were in the basement, in Dave's basement, for like some maybe a year and a half, and just writing and jamming, and then finally we went to record. And during all this period, there was stuff going on in the outside world, but I wasn't a part of it. You know, I mean, as far as what was going on in the press, what is Dave Roth doing? Everything was kept very secret. And I was just going into a guy's basement and playing. And then we went into the studio and recorded. It was kind of like when I made Crossroads. I was just kind of going into the studio and filming. Yep. And then you go home and you are a normal person. And then all of a sudden it comes out and everybody sees it. And then you go out and people are like, hey, there you are, you know? And you're like, well, yeah, you know, and then it takes an adjustment. It was an adjustment because it was interesting at first, you know, especially with Crossroads, because you can make hit records till you're blue in the face, but be in one hit movie, you know, and just have a little part. And hey, there's that guy, you know, every place you go. So that took an adjustment. It was fun. It was never my fame with those bands, or my recognition with those bands, was never so much that I couldn't lead a normal life, you know. Mm-hmm. But it was really nice to be recognized for your contribution, because I started reading some nice things about what I had played on Eat 'Em and Smile and the way I played. So I felt I don't know how other people may perceive it, but I felt accepted. You know, I felt well supported in that role with Dave, because it could have been very precarious, because Dave with Edward was so beloved by so many people. Who's this other guy? And he's no Edward, you know, whatever goes on. But I really paid no attention to that, because I loved the way Edward played, but I wouldn't want to play like anybody else but me. Why would you? You know, because then you're not you, you know. So I was very content and happy with what I had done, what I had contributed. Was it great? I don't know. I just know I did the best I could. And it was just so nice when it was not rejected.
Complete opposite, absolutely. And then you obviously, Eat 'Em and Smile, Skyscraper came out, and then I think I read that you'd left because you're wanting to pursue your own solo work and work on stuff that you've been working on for a long time. But then the offer came to join Whitesnake, and now, was that just too good an opportunity to turn down at the time?
Yeah, I had finished the Skyscraper tour. Before I joined Dave Roth, I was working on Passion and Warfare, because it's still my fascination for recording, and especially this brand of music in my mind. You have to honor your creative impulses, or you slip into depression. And I had to honor them. And at that point, it meant turning my back on rock stardom to create Passion and Warfare. In my mind, that's what I was doing. I was surrendering my career, because the music for Passion and Warfare was, I knew it was very different. It wasn't Dave Roth. It wasn't Whitesnake. It wasn't anything that I had heard, that you could point to and say, hey, that's a, like Avia Musicom by Eric Johnson, or hey, that's like Blow by Blow by Jeff Beck. Nothing. Or Surfing with the Alien. I mean, all of those records, you can't really compare them to each other. So Passion and Warfare was part of that, because it was a authentic offering from my inner ear. But then I couldn't understand how I was going to go out and tour it. Yeah. Because it was one record. It was a very dense record, very complex in a sense. And I was always more comfortable with having a front man and just being the guitar player. I didn't know how I'd be able to negotiate standing in front of a stage playing instrumental guitar music, And the Whitesnake gig was on the radar right at the exact same time. So I thought, well, it would make much more sense to tour with Whitesnake and make a record with them. And, for the momentum of that other side of my career. And lucky for me, I really liked the music of Whitesnake. Back then, their Whitesnake album that sold 25 million copies, it came out, and it was a great record. And I just love great singers. And Coverdale was a monster. I mean, come on, I watched that guy get on stage every night and deliver like a boss, So I thought, yeah, man, I want in. And it was great. When I got into the band, all the music was written and recorded for the Slip of the Tongue record. And I just had to put the guitars on it. And there was another really great group of guys. If anybody was difficult, it was me. I was a bit of a prima donna. I came from Dave Roth, and with Dave Roth, you learn certain things. How to navigate the business and navigate the magazines and the press and things like this. So, and plus, I had Passion and Warfare out. And it was blowing up while I was touring with Whitesnake. So I did the Slip of the Tongue, and we did a huge tour, and it was fantastic. At the end of it, David was going through some personal things. He was going through a divorce, and so he disbanded everything. But I knew that just instinctually. Of course, I didn't know for sure, but I kind of felt that I'd do a record and a tour with them, and I'd have to return to the quirky music that was in my head. And I did.
And obviously, Passion and Warfare you've spoken about. I have to touch on Sex and Religion as well. It's one of my good friends. It's one of his favorite albums of all time. I love the mix of the heavy and the light on there. And how did you go about making the record then on the back of the success of Passion and Warfare?
Well, I still kind of felt like I wanted to have a lead singer. And I started looking for one, and it was difficult, but Relativity Records, who I was signed to at the time, sent me a tape, and one of them was of Devin. Yeah. And he was a teenager at the time even. And I couldn't believe when I heard his voice, because I needed a singer. So I contacted him, and that's how we hooked up. And he came in to visit me, and man, he was bizarre. But he was extremely talented. Not bizarre. Bizarre isn't the right word. He was funny and a teenager, you know. I mean, an absolutely incredible singer. And I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to put a super group together and go out there and create a record that had more accessibility than Passion and Warfare, but had vocals and also some compositional elements. So it wasn't like straight ahead rock and roll. Metal, heavy metal was just coming in. And I was being influenced by that through Devin. So some of the stuff was very, very heavy, but it was melodic. And I finally had a singer that I could work with. So I built, I mean, if you listen to that record, there's oceans of vocal harmonies and things like that. And Devin was great to work with in the studio because he was eager and he was patient, you know. He didn't need a 5-star hotel and this kind of thing. But he was also incredibly talented in his own right. And that was kind of squelched in my band because I just needed him as a singer, you know. So I never really, I didn't know how brilliant he was as a creator, a musical creator, because I didn't allow it, basically, a little bit here and there, you know. But I had my vision, and I knew what I wanted to do. And we collaborated on some things, but it wasn't until later when Devin started making his solo music that I'm like, whoa, I didn't know that was there, you know. And because he is, in my book, a bona fide genius. He's as brilliant as they come at the thing that he does. And I think that his experience in my band was to a degree helpful for him in launching his own career and his own navigation of the studio, because he does all that too, you know. And he's incredibly prolific. But we did a tour, and it had its moments, you know. Devin was always entertaining, I can tell you that. You never knew what he was going to do. He was unpredictable, and he was bold, and he was, did I say unpredictable?
I think you did.
Yeah. And he would just do these crazy things. So it was constantly entertaining. I knew it was frustrating for him because he had so much to offer, and it was bubbling inside of him, and he was trapped in the Vai cage, you know, doing music that he, you know, maybe he does it, not necessarily what he would do, but he was a good sport about it.
So, well, we'll just move on to your guitar as well. I mean, it's an iconic part of you and what you are, your identity. I mean, the famous story wasn't it people were looking for you to be their brand, the face of their brand, use their guitars, and you basically said, look, I want these requirements. If you can come back to me with these, then I'll go with you. And Ibanez came back and they responded the best. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, what happened was, working with Frank, I realized if you want something, you can just build it. Or if you want to change something, you just change it. So it was kind of sacrilegious to alter guitars. Like if you had a Les Paul or a Strat, you don't drill holes in it and do it. But Frank did that. So I thought, well, There were certain things, certain aspects about conventional guitars that I like, but there was limitations. Like I liked Strats, but I wasn't crazy about the sound. And the single coil pickups weren't rock and roll for me. And I didn't like that it only had 22 frets and you couldn't. So, and the Les Paul, I loved Les Pauls, but they didn't have whammy bars. So I just decided to go to this little music shop and design a guitar for me. And it was very naive, very innocent. And I had no expectations of it, of anything happening with it except for me. But it really had some creative, innovative things worked into it. And I didn't know. I just said, I want 24 frets on a Strat style body. That was unique at the time. And the cutaway should be like this so I could reach the notes. It seemed so stupid to me that they would make guitars with cutaways and frets, but you can't reach them. Why? Nobody wants to shake up the apple cart. So I'm like, no, you got to cut it away. And then, the pickup configuration was unique because it would split coils in certain positions. I didn't know any of this. I would just say, hey, can you make it do this? And then, it had a floating tremolo. And this was the first time they existed like that, because the Floyd had just come out. And I wanted to be able to pull way up on the whammy bar. The Floyd Rose was a locking tremolo system, and I wanted to be able to pull up on the bar really high. And I just looked at it and I realized there was just some wood in the way, so I hacked it out, and that was like the first floating trem setting bridge. So I had this guitar, and I had 4 of them made. And then when I joined Dave Roth's band, a lot of the guitar companies were interested in having me endorse their guitars. But, I said, well, thanks, but I got this one. And then they said, well, we'll make it for you. So I thought, well, that would be convenient if I had a company making me the exact guitar that I designed and that I liked. But all the guitars that these companies, I sent out the design. I said, well, make me this guitar. And inevitably, and I said, whoever makes the best one, I'll use. And inevitably, they'd send me back their guitar with my name on it. Like a lot of times, signature series guitars for a guitarist are the brand's standard guitar with a couple, like a certain fret wire, a certain kinds of pickups in it. It's not a reconstruction of the entire guitar. That didn't become popular until more later. And the Jem was one of the first, because it was a whole rebuild.
Yeah. Because
even when Ibanez sent me, when I sent them the Jem, I said, make me this. The first thing they gave me was this. They did the same thing the other companies did. They gave me their guitar, their idea of what I would like. And I hated it. I'm like, why give me that guitar? It's just like, it has nothing to do with what I want. So I just thought, okay, forget these companies. I'm just going to have my own guitar made for me. But then Ibanez said they got it. They're like, okay, we better make what he wants. And they made the Jem. And I thought it was fantastic, and now I had this company making this guitar. And then they said, well, we'd like to make this for other people. And I thought, well, okay, and then you work a deal. And the deal I worked was also unprecedented. And it worked great for everybody, the fans, the people that liked the guitar. It kind of struck a nerve that was great for Hoshino, Ibanez. It was great for me. And it's been a lovely, amazing, creative relationship, prosperous, abundant we're going to be rolling on 40 years pretty soon. Yeah.
Incredible.
It's a great relationship. It's one of those things in the music, in business, in any business you're in. It's so nice to be able to look back at these very long relationships, fruitful, enjoyable,
Trusted,
creative, trusted, and I have a lot of them. Larry DiMarzio, Sterling Ball, Larry for the pickups, Sterling with the strings. So many, it's nice.
Fantastic. And obviously you kept busy for many, many years. You've always done different projects, released many albums. You're always doing your master classes. There's the touring, that sort of thing. And I think you've been on the road in Europe and South America recently. And tell us about that. What can people expect from these concerts?
Well, this tour started, we kicked it off in support of the Inviolate record. Inviolate was my last instrumental studio record. And it's one of the record came out a lot better than I was expecting. It was received very well. Another blessing, And we kicked off this tour last summer, and I really wanted to do a comprehensive world tour. I've done a bunch of them, and they take me to all corners of the world. And we did a first European leg in Western Europe, and then we did a full-on American leg in all the main cities and stuff. And then we went back and did Eastern Europe, and then we just finished Latin America. Go to Asia, and I've got 10 shows in China. They tell me I'm the first artist to go into mainland China on tour. That many shows, which I love doing that. And then I used to go to Russia all the time. Unfortunately, can't do that now. But then we, kind of work our way down through Asia, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan. Then we go to Malaysia and Indonesia, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Jakarta, Vietnam. And then we are in Australia and New Zealand. None of this is announced because it can change. Yeah. Where this is what I'm planning. When nothing is written in stone until we actually make an announcement. So I'm just kind of giving you preliminary thoughts. And then after that, it's the Middle East. I'm trying to get to places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi. We may have offers from Egypt, Africa, India, Tel Aviv. So this is what I'm hoping for. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, in the works. And then then it's Christmas. And then it's G3 in America for a little bit. And then it's Joe and I are talking about going out and touring together. And then there's some other things, so there'll be a lot of touring, and which is nice because I really do enjoy touring.
I was going to say you could hear the delight in your voice when you're talking about touring. I speak to some people, and although they like being on the stage and they like playing for the audiences, touring it kind of gets them down, especially after this many years of doing it. But to you, it sounds like it excites you.
Yeah, I like waking up in different cities. In the beginning, like with Frank, no. The way that he toured, flying on a plane every day, those kinds of sound checks, gigs, having to practice all the time, no. After that tour, I thought I'm never touring again. But then when I went out with Dave Roth, it was like just party time. You're a king. You don't have to do sound check. You travel on a bus. You get to sleep all you want. You get to a new city it's fun little towns, and it's a whole different kind of a thing. So I started to focus on those things that I really enjoyed about touring, because that's how you get around hating stuff. You focus on what you like. It takes a little bit of willpower. Yeah. But then once you start doing it, you start having a great time. So the things that I always focus on when I'm traveling and touring, it's the culture. I love seeing all these different cultures. I mean, I've played, I was one of the first artists to go to communist China and play, and Russia. I went to Russia in the 90s, or in the mid 90s, and South America. and the Baltics. I waited. I remember I would call my agent and I'd say, listen, I want to go to Slovenia, Slovakia, Yugoslavia at the time of Yugoslavia. And, and he said, you can't go there. Nobody goes there. So finally it started to open up and I started touring Eastern Europe. It's just fantastic. I mean, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Turkey, Greece, Croatia. They're part of every tour for the past ever since the late 90s, and it's fascinating. They're all diverse. The food is different, the culture is different, the architecture is different, the people are different, the audiences are different. So I started embracing these things as glorious life experiences, because you know what they are, and they just turn into that. Now, sometimes it's a challenge, like if you have to fly and do back-to-back shows, then you got to learn how to go to sleep. But for the most part, it's a piece of cake. You can only ever do one thing at a time. And if that one thing is taking a step onto a tour bus, that's that one thing. There's nothing hard about it. It's all in the head.
Yeah, absolutely.
People, there's this rumor that it's hard to tour, and it of course it has its challenges. Of course, if you're not prepared for it, but if you focus on those things that you can appreciate. And that goes for anything, then your experience of doing that thing changes. And what's your alternative?
Absolutely.
Being a miserable son of a bitch. That's your
alternative. That is it. That is it indeed. Well, you've got so much in the pipeline, still not confirmed yet. What's the best way for people to keep in touch with you and find out when these things do land and do get confirmed?
Oh, my Instagram, my social media. My website, vai.com. Same suspects that most artists have.
Fantastic. Lovely stuff. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, Steve. I've loved this last hour or so. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And I just want to say that I really enjoyed this touring on this record, and all the folks that have come to the shows. You really got me, man. They've risen the bar. They've been so supportive. We really have a great time, and I want to thank them, and thank you.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
You got it. Take
Lovely.
care.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.